So let's talk about the technology. RFID, radio frequency identification. Each of your cards is embedded with a programmed RFID chip, impossible to see. These things are plastic, by the way, and they will last a lifetime. I've dropped mine. I've been performing it hundreds of times now, and they still look absolutely great. So as the chip reader reads the RFID chip, that information is sent to the app, which then changes the wallpaper and the ringtone on your phone to the selected artist. It's really that simple, and as you'll see, it's incredibly reliable. As long as everything is charged and working the way it's supposed to work, it will change the wallpaper and ringtone every single time. So let's talk about how to set things up, because you have a variety of options available to you, and I suspect you may even come up with something new of your own design, which is great. As I mentioned earlier, you are provided with the bag, which just looks like a standard carrying case, pencil case, whatever you want to call it. If you're going to use the bag, I really suggest that you start your presentation with everything, the cards, that is to say, and your business card inside the bag. This rationalizes why you have this thing. If it comes out of nowhere and the cards have already been on the table, then it kind of looks odd. My point is that a prop is not a prop if it has an organic rationale as to why it's being included in the presentation. So if you start with everything in the bag just like this, take them out, talk about whatever it is, your presentation, and we'll get into a variety of presentational options a little later on, have them make their decision, place one back in the bag, and you're off to the races. Now, let's talk about a couple of different issues or restrictions with RFID technology. One, of course, is the range. As I mentioned, you'll get about a 6-inch range on this, which to my knowledge is a greater range than any RFID product that I've used. It's remarkable how distant you can be and still pick up the information for something that is so small. And what that means is that if you have it, for instance, the card reader on your wrist, you don't need to touch someone's hand if they're holding the card, for instance, between their hands. You can be this high above and still get a read, which is pretty impressive. And that is really the second option, and the one that I prefer to use when I'm standing up. I have this nylon stretchy thing. I'm not even sure where I got this, but you can get all kinds of sport wristbands, little things that are intended to hold Fitbits and stuff like that, and all you need is something that you can basically slide the reader into that's going to hold it in that position, and you're good to go. Obviously I wouldn't have this sticking out, although it just looks like I injured my wrist, but you would have your long sleeve over it in that case. This isn't a set up for using short sleeves, suffice it to say. The reason I like to use this when I'm standing is what I can say to the person is just place the card between your two hands and sandwich it like this. And then I point as he's holding the card, and I say, I want to point out that my phone and business card have been on the table the entire time. By the way, I don't know if you can hear that, but it's vibrating right now. That tells me that I'm getting the read, that it's changing the wallpaper and the ringtone. When you're sitting, it's a little more awkward to use this, especially if the person's sitting across from you. You don't want to be reaching or anything like that. But this is really nice and clean. With the vibration, it gives you the confirmation the information's been received, and it's, well, it's not uncomfortable to wear this. I've had this on for hours and no issue whatsoever. If you want to go to other options, the RFID chip reader is so small that you can place this inside a book without doing much work and just have them, if the book happens to be on the table, it could be a book on music, rock history, or something like that, have them place their selected card inside the book, almost as an afterthought. You know what, I'm going to turn around, I don't want to see what you have, just put it in the book. It could be a bag, whatever you do. I would just suggest staying away from things that look like props, that don't really have an organic place in the presentation. Sure, a box if you could find a context for it, but any place that you can hide this thing, and as I say, it's so small. It could be under the table, for instance, in certain instances. But let's talk about, as I mentioned, two challenges or issues that come into play with RFID technology. The first is metal surfaces. And I have to tell you, this one freaked me out, because the first time I performed this, for a couple of people in Las Vegas. We were out at, I forget what the restaurant was, and it was a beautiful wooden table, and I thought nothing of it. And I had the bag placed on the table with the reader inside, and I asked with my back turned that one of the two people place their card inside the bag. They did that, and we went through the whole presentation, and when the phone call was made, it was the wrong song, wrong artist. The reason I later discovered, after having a short freak out for a while, because this was sort of the debut of Desert Island before I performed it for a convention in Las Vegas of mentalists, what I discovered was that the table underneath the wood was steel. And RFID signals will be blocked by steel, even if the steel is below the surface. You would think if the reader is above and the card is above, no issue. But the steel will block the signal. So be cognizant of that where you're performing. Very simple solution. Have the person hold the bag. And that's what I do now most of the time. If I'm using the bag, I'm turned around, they're behind me, and I say, do you have one selected? Yes, I do. You know what? I'm going to turn around, so why don't you place it back in the bag? Which seems very natural. They're now holding this, so there's not much chance that it's going to come in contact with a steel plate. And don't worry about the little zippers and stuff. They really don't come into play. Nor should you be concerned with the amount of space in here and the reader. If for some reason you're not getting the read, it could be just a question of tilting this, but I've not really had an issue with the amount of space in here and the reader not picking up on the card. Very important as well, if you're using the bag, I mentioned this earlier, there's a light when you power this on that will flash. And when a card comes into contact with the reader, it will blink green. If you have this sitting with the light facing forward and you're in a darker room performing, there is a possibility that people will see a blinking light. So two things I suggest. The first is always place the reader inside the bag with the light towards the back. That still creates a possibility where when the person puts their selected album or artist into the bag, they may see a blinking light. So what I've started to do is just put a piece of tape with some kind of dark paper or something. This is actually a piece from the end of the Scotch tape. I just covered this. We were performing this at My Invention dozens of times a day, and I was just sort of messing around with different things, and this was tremendously effective. Because you don't really need to see the light, but it's a nice feature to have, particularly when you're powering things up. You can still see the light through this, but no one else can when it's inside the bag. So that's a recommendation. And here's the other point I want to make about RFID technology. Its sister is NFC, Near Field Communication. And a lot of mobile phones now are equipped with NFC, and this is a feature that's being used more and more to pick up on information. It basically means that your phone itself becomes a reader. There are a lot of limitations to NFC because we looked at using that, and one of them is that people are aware of it, and if they see something like this occurring where the card is coming in contact with the phone, they may suspect someone who is knowledgeable about NFC that that is the technology you're using. So for that reason, I do recommend that the phone is not in direct contact with the area where the card will be placed, because that could create some suspicion. And in fact, we want the cell phone to be sort of out of the way, as if you've just put it onto the table, not as if it's a part of the presentation. So I always like to have it sort of off to the side, away from where the activity is. So we're going to talk next about your phone, where to place it, some of the options, do's and don'ts, and things that I've picked up after performing this for a while when we come back.